They dragged her to the Stone of Atonement in the dead of winter, wearing nothing but a thin white shift. The Silver Creek pack believed that sacrificing an innocent soul to the demon of the woods would save their dying crops and failing bloodlines. They didn't care that Grace Vance was innocent. They only cared that she was an orphan, with no one to mourn her. As Alpha Marcus tightened the chains around her wrists, he whispered that her death was a noble gift. But Marcus made a fatal mistake that night. The beast lurking in the shadows wasn't a demon. He was Kalen Blackthorn, the true Alpha King that Marcus had betrayed and buried 10 years ago. And tonight the sacrifice wouldn't be his meal. She would become his queen. The biting wind of the Northern Territories felt like a whip against Grace Vance's skin. The snow crunched violently under the heavy boots of the two enforcers, dragging her by her arms, her bare feet leaving a trail of blood on the pristine white ground. "Please!" Grace gasped, her voice hoarse, from hours of screaming in the holding cell. "Alpha Marcus, please, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm loyal to the pack." The procession didn't stop. It was a macabre parade. The entire Silver Creek pack had turned out, holding torches that cast long dancing shadows against the pine trees. But there was no pity in their eyes. There was only desperate, hungry relief. It wasn't them. It was her. They reached the edge of the Forbidden Zone, where the ancient tree line grew so thick it looked like a wall of solid black ink. At the center of the clearing stood the Stone of Atonement, a slab of gray granite stained with the rust-colored memories of older, darker times. Alpha Marcus Thorne stood by the rock, wrapped in a luxurious fur coat that had likely cost more than Grace would have earned in 10 lifetimes of scrubbing the packhouse floors. Beside him stood his daughter, Jessica Thorne. Jessica was beautiful in the way a polished diamond is beautiful, cold hard, and capable of cutting you if you held it wrong. She was smirking. "Father," Jessica said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "is she really worthy?" The prophecy says the beast demands a pure offering. Grace is just the help. Marcus laughed, a deep, booming sound that didn't reach his shark-like eyes. The beast is a mindless monster, Jessica. It desires flesh and blood. Grace has plenty of both. Besides, she has no family. If the beast rejects her, we haven't lost anything of value. Grace felt the words like a physical punch to the gut. Nothing of value. She had cleaned their clothes, cooked their meals, and nursed their pups when the flu swept through the lower quarters. She had been invisible, quiet, and obedient. And this was her reward? Beta Jackson. A man Grace had once had a crush on when they were teenagers stepped forward. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He grabbed her wrists and slammed them against the freezing stone. The metallic clink of the iron shackles locking into place signaled the end of her life. "Jackson," she whispered, a tear freezing on her cheek. "You know this is wrong. You know the legends are just stories to scare children. There is no curse. It's just wild wolves." Jackson tightened the bolt, finally looking at her. His eyes were void of emotion. "The pack is starving, Grace. The deer have moved south. The crops rotted in the silo. Alpha Marcus says the cursed wolf of the north demands a tribute to release the game back to our lands. Better you than me." He stepped back. Alpha Marcus raised his hands, silencing the murmuring crowd. "Tonight we cleanse our sins," he bellowed. "We offer this girl, Grace Vance, to the spirit of the Forbidden Woods. May her blood wash away our misfortune. May the cursed wolf take her and leave us in peace. Take her," the crowd chanted. "Take her." Grace tugged uselessly at the chains. The cold was beginning to seep into her bones, making her limbs heavy and numb. She looked at the faces in the crowd, people she had grown up with. Mrs. Gable, the baker. Mr. Henderson, the blacksmith. They were all watching her with a terrifying mixture of guilt and anticipation. "Leave her," Marcus commanded. The torches turned away. One by one the lights flickered and retreated back toward the safety of the village walls. Jessica was the last to leave. She walked up to the stone, leaning in close to Grace's ear. "I hope it hurts," Jessica whispered, her breath hot against Grace's frozen skin. "I hope he tears you apart, slowly. That's what you get for staring at Jackson, you filth." With a cruel laugh, she turned and followed her father. Silence descended on the clearing. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the whistling wind and the frantic beating of Grace's heart. She was alone. She slumped against the stone, the rough granite biting into her back. She tried to shift into her wolf to call upon the heat of her spirit, but she was too weak from malnutrition and the sedatives they had forced down her throat earlier that day. She was human, fragile and freezing. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time distorted when you were waiting to die. Then she heard it. A snap of a twig. It wasn't the wind, it was heavy, deliberate. Grace held her breath, her eyes scanning the impenetrable darkness of the forbidden zone. Two orbs appeared in the blackness. They were glowing a luminous electric violet that seemed to hum with power. A low growl vibrated through the ground, shaking the stone she was chained to. It wasn't the growl of a normal wolf. It sounded like the earth itself was grinding its teeth. "Please," she whimpered, closing her eyes. "Make it quick." A massive shadow detached itself from the trees. It was a wolf, but the size was impossible. It stood nearly as tall as a horse, at the shoulder, its fur as black as a starless night. Scars crisscrossed its muzzle, silver lines of old violence. The cursed wolf, the monster Alpha, Marcus said ate the souls of the damned. The beast stepped into the moonlight, its massive paws silent on the snow. It lowered its head, sniffing the air. It was smelling the blood on her feet. It was smelling her fear. Grace squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the teeth. Waiting for the end. She felt a hot burst of air against her neck. The beast was sniffing her hair. A rough, wet nose nudged her frozen cheek. She didn't move. The growl stopped it. Instead, a huff of air escaped the wolf's snout. It sounded almost like confusion. Suddenly the sound of cracking bones filled the clearing. It was the sickening wet sound of a shift. Grace's eyes flew open. The giant wolf was gone. Standing in its place, naked and steaming in the cold air, was a man. He was huge, his muscles corded and defined, covered in the same silver scars that the wolf had borne. His hair was long and wild black as ink, and his eyes were still that terrifying electric violet. He didn't look like a mindless beast. He looked like a god of war carved from granite. He reached out a hand not to strike her, but to touch the iron shackle on her wrist. He looked at the chain, then back at her face. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, like gravel tumbling down a mountainside. "Who chained you to my boundary stone, little one?" Grace was too stunned to speak. "This was the monster. Speak," he commanded, though his tone wasn't angry at her. It was angry for her. "Who offers a living soul to a man they claim is dead?" The Silver Creek pack." Grace stammered, her teeth chattering violently. "Alpha Marcus. He said you are the cursed wolf, the sacrifice to save the crops." The man's eyes narrowed. A flash of pure, unadulterated rage crossed his face. "Marcus," he snarled the name like a curse. "He still lives, and he sends me a woman to do his dirty work." He grabbed the iron chain with one hand. Grace flinched, expecting him to use it to hurt her. Instead, the muscles in his arm bunched. With a roar of exertion, he pulled. Snap! The iron link shattered as if it were made of glass. Grace fell forward, her legs too numb to hold her. The man caught her easily, scooping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. His skin was incredibly hot, a furnace against her frozen body. "I am no curse, little one," he grumbled, turning back toward the dark forest, carrying her with him. And Marcus has made a grave error. He thought he was feeding a beast. Instead, he just gave me the one thing I needed to take back my kingdom. "What? What is that?" Grace whispered, darkness encroaching on her vision as the warmth of his body lulled her into unconsciousness. The man looked down at her, his violet eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "A witness," he said. Grace woke to the smell of roasting meat and cedarwood. Panic surged instantly. She sat up, gasping, her hands flying to her throat. She expected the cold bite of the snow, the chains, the teeth of the wolf. Instead, she was in a bed. A massive bed covered in thick, soft furs. She looked around. She was in a cabin, but cabin was too small a word. It was a lodge built from massive logs with a high vaulted ceiling. A fire roared in a stone hearth large enough to stand in. The room was rugged, but filled with books, maps, and weapons hanging on the walls. It wasn't the lair of a monster. It was the home of a warrior. "You're awake." She jumped. The man, the wolf, was standing by the fire. He was dressed now wearing black cargo pants and a simple grey thermal shirt that struggled to contain the width of his shoulders. He held a wooden bowl in his hands. He walked over to the bed. Up close, he was even more intimidating. A jagged scar ran from his temple down to his jawline, giving him a dangerous, rugged look. But he was handsome. Devastatingly so. "Drink," he said, holding out the bowl. "Broth. You were bordering on hypothermia. If I hadn't found you, your heart would have stopped within the hour." Grace took the bowl with trembling hands. You didn't eat me." The man snorted a dry, humorless sound. He pulled a heavy wooden chair close to the bed and sat down, watching her with those intense, violet eyes. "I am not a cannibal despite what Marcus tells his sheep. My name is Kalen." "I'm Grace," she whispered, taking a sip of the broth. It was rich and savory, the best thing she had tasted in years. "I know," Kalen said. "You mumbled in your sleep. You mumbled about a lot of things. Injustice, fear, hunger." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Tell me, Grace, why did Marcus really send you the crops failing as a lie? The land is dying because the leadership is corrupt, not because of a curse." Grace lowered the bowl. He said the pack is weak. No pups have been born in 2 years. He said the spirit of the North, you had cursed our bloodline. Kalen threw his head back and laughed. It was a dark, bitter sound. "I cursed nothing. The moon goddess closed her womb to the Silver Creek pack because an usurper sits on the throne." Grace froze. "Usurper." Kalen stood up and walked to a wall covered in an old, tattered tapestry. He pulled it aside to reveal a portrait. It was dusty and faded, but the face was unmistakable. It was Kalen Younger, wearing the ceremonial alpha medallion, the obsidian star. Beside him, slightly bowed, was a younger Marcus. 10 years ago. Kalen's voice dropped to a low rumble. "I was the alpha of Silver Creek. We were the strongest pack in the territory. Marcus was my beta, my best friend." He traced the face of the man in the painting. "My father, the previous king, had just passed. I was young. I trusted too easily. Marcus poisoned my drink during the ascension ceremony with wolfsbane and silver nitrate. It didn't kill me, but it stripped me of my ability to shift for months. It drove me into a delirium." Grace gasped. The madness of 15. The history books say the Alpha King went mad and slaughtered his council. "Lies," Kalen spat, Marcus slaughtered the council, those loyal to me. He dragged my paralyzed body to the edge of the territory and threw me into the ravine. He told the pack I had turned into a demon and fled. He declared himself Alpha to save the pack. Grace's mind was racing. Everything she had been taught in the pack school was a lie. Marcus wasn't the savior, he was the villain. And Kaelin wasn't the monster, he was the victim. But that was 10 years ago, Grace said softly. Why stay here? Why stay in the shadows? You're strong. I saw your wolf. You could tear Marcus apart. Kaelin turned to look at her, and for the first time, Grace saw a glimmer of pain behind the steel walls of his eyes. Because the poison did more than paralyze me, Grace. It severed my connection to the pack link. An alpha draws strength from his pack. Without them, I am a rogue in the eyes of the magic. If I challenge him without a legitimate claim or a witness to the betrayal, the pack laws will view me as an invader. I needed an opening. I needed a mistake. He took a step toward her. The air in the room seemed to crackle with electricity. And Marcus just made his mistake. He sent me a member of the pack. He performed a ritual of sacrifice. Kaelin smirked, a dangerous, predatory expression that made Grace's heart skip a beat, not out of fear, but out of something else. Something ancient. By offering you to me, he formally transferred your bond. You are no longer Silver Creek. You belong to the demon of the woods now. He knelt by the side of the bed, bringing his face level with hers. Technically, Grace Vance, you are now my pack, my first member in 10 years. Grace stared at him. Your pack. Yes, Kaelin vowed. And through you the bond is re-established. I can feel the faint hum of the pack land again through your blood. He gave me the key to the back door. He stood up, extending a hand to her. I am going to take back my throne, Grace. I am going to make Marcus pay for every drop of blood he spilled. But I cannot do it alone. I need someone who knows the inside, someone they won't suspect until it's too late. He paused, his violet eyes locking onto hers. Will you help me destroy him? Will you be the queen that Silver Creek forgot? Grace looked at his hand. She thought of Jessica's cruel whispers. She thought of Beta Jackson's betrayal. She thought of the cold stone and the laughter of the people she had served. They had thrown her away. They had fed her to the wolf. Well, she thought, feeling a spark of anger ignite in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. If they wanted her to be wolf food, she would be. But she wouldn't be the meal. She would be the teeth. Grace reached out and grasped Kaelin's hand. His grip was firm, warm, and electric. When do we start? She asked. Kaelin smiled. It was a real smile this time. First we eat, then I teach you how to hunt, because when we return to Silver Creek, Grace, we aren't going to knock. 3 weeks had passed since Grace was left to die on the Stone of Atonement. To the Silver Creek pack, she was a memory, a ghost haunting the woods. But inside Kaelin's mountain fortress, she was becoming something else entirely. Every morning began before the sun crested the peaks. Kaelin was a relentless teacher. He didn't treat her like a fragile doll. He treated her like a soldier who had been asleep at her post. Again. Kaelin barked his breath, visible in the freezing morning air. Grace lay panting in the snow, her muscles screaming. They were sparring in the clearing behind the cabin. Kaelin moved with a fluid, terrifying grace that made him nearly impossible to hit. I can't! Grace gasped, pushing herself up on trembling arms. I'm not like you, Kaelin. I'm an omega, a scrub. I can't even shift. Kaelin stopped. He walked over to her, his shadow falling long over her prone form. He reached down, grabbing her hand and pulling her to her feet with effortless strength. He didn't let go of her hand. He pulled her close until her chest bumped against his solid chest. The electricity that sparked between them was becoming harder to ignore, a magnetic pull that made Grace's wolf buried deep inside whine with longing. "You are not an omega," Kalen said, his voice low and intense. "Do you know why you couldn't shift back at the pack house?" Grace looked down. "Because I'm weak." "No." Kalen lifted her chin with a rough finger, forcing her to look into his violet eyes. "Because you were starved. Malnutrition keeps the wolf dormant. But look at you now." Grace looked down at herself. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out. Her arms, once stick-thin, now held definition. Her skin, previously grey and sallow from living in the cellar, glowed with health. The rich venison stews and protein-heavy meals Kalen cooked for her had done their work. "Your wolf is waking up, Grace," Kalen whispered, his thumb grazing her jawline. "I can smell her. She smells like rain and wild lilacs." Grace's breath hitched. Only a fated mate could smell the specific scent of a wolf before they shifted. She looked at him, searching his face. "Kalen, why are you doing this? Why train me? You could have just gathered your strength and attacked Marcus alone." Kalen stepped back, the loss of his warmth hitting her instantly. He turned to look at the forest. "Because a king needs a queen who can stand beside him, not behind him. And because, when I look at you, I don't see a victim. I see the fire that Marcus tried to extinguish." He turned back to her, his expression hard. "Now try again. But this time, don't punch with your hand. Punch with your spirit. Call her forward." Grace closed her eyes. She focused on the anger. The years of scrubbing floors while Jessica kicked over her water bucket. The way Alpha Marcus had looked at her with disdain. The betrayal of Jackson. A heat began to build in her belly. It wasn't the cold fire of fear. It was the molten lava of rage. She felt her bones crack, a sensation of pain that was strangely euphoric. "That's it," she heard Kalen urge her, his voice thick with emotion. "Let her out." With a scream that turned into a howl, Grace's body contorted. She fell to all fours, her hands morphing into paws, her skin stretching and changing. When she opened her eyes again, the world was sharper. Colors were vivid. She could hear the heartbeat of a squirrel in a tree 50 yards away. She looked down at her paws. They weren't brown or grey like the common wolves of Silver Creek. They were white. Pure, blinding white like the snow around her. She looked up at Kalen. The Alpha King was staring at her, his mouth slightly open, a look of absolute awe on his face. "A white wolf," he breathed. "The legends speak of them. They are the bringers of justice, the pure ones." He knelt in the snow, bowing his head slightly, a sign of immense respect from an alpha. Grace, his voice echoed in her mind, the mind link. It was the first time she had ever heard it. It was deep, resonant, and felt like home. "You are magnificent." Grace yipped, hopping around him, feeling lighter than air. She tackled him, pushing him into the snow. Kalen laughed, a sound of pure joy that shook the trees. He shifted instantly, his massive black wolf emerging to wrestle with her. They played for an hour, a dance of black and white against the winter landscape. It was a courtship dance, ancient and primal. When they finally shifted back exhausted and lying in the snow, the sun was high in the sky. Kalen wrapped a heavy fur blanket around both of them as they sat against a tree trunk. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling safe for the first time in her life. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew I was your mate." Kalen tightened his arm around her. "I suspected the moment I smelled your blood on the stone, but I couldn't claim you while you were weak. It wouldn't have been fair. I wanted you to find your strength first." He kissed the top of her head. "But now you are a force of nature, Grace, and I am yours." Grace looked at her hand, clenching it into a fist. She felt the power coursing through her. "Then let's go get our kingdom back," she said. The border of the Silver Creek territory was heavily guarded, but Grace knew the blind spots. For years, she had been the one sent to dump the trash in the ravines where the enforcers didn't like to patrol because the mud ruined their boots. "Stay low," Kalen commanded, his voice a mere vibration in the air. They were dressed in tactical gear Kalen had scavenged over the years, black combat fatigues that blended into the shadows of the twilight. They lay on a ridge overlooking the supply road. "That's the delivery truck," Grace pointed out. "It comes every Tuesday. If Marcus is struggling, that truck will be light." Kalen peered through a pair of high-powered binoculars. "It's not food. Look at the suspension. It's riding low, heavy cargo." "Weapons?" Grace asked. "Or gold?" Kalen mused. "Let's find out." They moved down the ridge like smoke. Kalen's training had honed Grace's natural stealth. She moved silently, her breathing controlled. They reached the road just as the truck rumbled around the bend. Kalen didn't use magic. He used physics. He rolled a massive log they had prepared earlier down the embankment. It slammed into the road just in front of the truck. The driver slammed on the brakes, the vehicle skidding on the ice and coming to a halt inches from the timber. Two men jumped out. Grace recognized them instantly. It was Gary and Mike, two low-level enforcers who used to trip her in the cafeteria. "Clear the road, you idiot!" Gary shouted at the forest. Kalen stepped out from the shadows. He didn't shift. He didn't need to. He simply walked toward them, radiating an aura of alpha power, so dense it made the air hard to breathe. "Who are you?" Mike stammered, reaching for the stun baton at his belt. "The toll collector," Kalen growled. Before Mike could unclip his weapon, Kalen was on him. A swift punch to the gut doubled Mike over, followed by a knee to the face that knocked him unconscious instantly. Gary panicked and pulled a handgun, a violation of traditional werewolf combat laws, but Marcus's pack had no honor left. He aimed at Kalen. Bang! The shot went wide as a white blur slammed into Gary from the side. Grace in human form had flanked him. She kicked the gun out of his hand and swept his legs out from under him. As he hit the ground, she placed her boot on his throat, applying just enough pressure to choke him. "Hi, Gary," she said sweetly. Gary's eyes bulged. "Grace, you're dead. The beast ate you." "The beast has better taste," she smirked. Kalen walked over, dragging the unconscious Mike. He looked at Grace with pride burning in his eyes. "Check the truck." Grace hopped into the back of the cargo van and pried open a crate. Her eyes widened. "Kalen," she called out. "It's not weapons, it's mining equipment and contracts." Kalen joined her, reading the papers under the dim cargo light. His face darkened, a storm brewing in his expression. "He's selling the land," Kalen snarled. "This contract, it's with the Crimson Rock Mining Corporation. Marcus is selling the rights to the sacred burial grounds. He's going to let humans mine the ancestral lands for lithium." Grace felt sick. The burial grounds were where every Alpha and Pack member had been laid to rest for centuries. To dig it up was the ultimate sacrilege. It would break the spiritual anchor of the Pack forever. He's not just destroying the Pack, Grace realized. He's cashing out. He knows the Pack is failing, so he's going to take the money and run. "Look at the date on this transfer." Kalen pointed to the bottom of the document. "The final signing is set for the Winter Solstice Gala. That's in 2 days." The Gala, Grace remembered. It's the biggest event of the year. All the neighboring Alphas will be there. The elders, the press. Kalen crumpled the paper in his fist. Perfect. Perfect, Grace asked. Marcus is going to destroy us in 48 hours. No, Kalen corrected, a terrifying grin spreading across his face. In 48 hours, Marcus is going to assemble the perfect audience for his own execution. He looked at Gary, who was still gasping for air under Grace's boot. We need to send a message, Kalen said. But not yet. We need an invitation. He knelt down to Gary. Listen closely, traitor. You're going to go back to the pack house. You're going to tell Marcus that the truck hit a patch of ice and you were delayed. If you mention seeing us, I will hunt you down and peel the skin from your bones. Do you understand? Gary nodded, frantically, tears streaming down his face. Good. Kalen stood up. Grace grabbed the suits from the back. It seems we are going to a party. As they melted back into the woods, leaving the confused and terrified enforcers behind, Grace felt a thrill of adrenaline. Kalen, she asked, as they hiked back up the ridge. How do we walk into the gala without being killed on sight? Marcus has hundreds of guards. Kalen stopped and pulled her close, kissing her deeply, a kiss that tasted of promise and danger. Because my queen, he whispered against her lips. By the time they realize who we are, we'll already be on the stage. The Silver Creek pack house was unrecognizable, usually a place of drab grey stone and strict utility. Tonight it glittered. Thousands of fairy lights were strung through the ancient oaks surrounding the driveway. Expensive imported cars lined the gravel path, dropping off alphas and dignitaries from neighboring territories. Marcus had spared no expense. He was selling their future to pay for a party meant to impress the very people who would witness his final betrayal. A sleek, black limousine pulled up to the front steps. It was older, a classic model, but maintained to perfection. It stood out among the modern sports cars, a statement of timeless power. The valet opened the rear door, and Kalen stepped out. He drew a collective gasp from the Omega servers lining the stairs. He was polished perfection. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, cut so precisely it seemed painted onto his warrior's frame. His long dark hair was tied back, neatly emphasizing the sharp angles of his jaw and the electric intensity of his violet eyes. The scar on his face didn't detract from his appearance. It enhanced it, giving him an air of dangerous mystery. He extended a hand back into the car. My lady. A pale hand, gloved in white silk, took his. Grace stepped out into the light. If Kalen drew gasps, Grace drew silence. She was wearing a gown of liquid silver that clung to every new curve of her honed body, cascading to the floor like moonlight made of fabric. Her hair, once dull and brittle, was a shining cascade of platinum blonde waves, arranged in an intricate updo, interwoven with small diamonds that caught the light like stars. She wore a simple silver mask over her eyes, as did Kalen, a nod to the solstice masquerade theme. But even masked, she was breathtaking. She looked nothing like the shivering, malnourished servant girl they had dragged into the woods 3 weeks ago. She looked like royalty. Breathe, Kalen murmured through their mind link, his voice a comforting caress in her head. You are the most powerful creature here. Remember that. I remember, Grace replied, lifting her chin. She felt the hum of her white wolf beneath her skin, a wellspring of endless courage. They ascended the stairs arm in arm. At the massive oak doors, Beta Jackson was checking the guest list, looking uncomfortable in a stiff tuxedo. He stopped them, his eyes darting over Kalen's imposing figure. Name Lord Vane, Kalen said, using an old alias his family used for external business dealings. And Lady Grace? Jackson paused. His pen hovered over the clipboard. He looked up, squinting at Grace. The name struck a chord, but the woman standing before him, radiant, confident smelling of expensive perfume and raw power, could not possibly be the Omega they had sacrificed. He sniffed the air discreetly. Kaelin had masked their scents with a powerful herbal compound, making them smell faintly of winter forests, and nothing else. "I don't see your names on the primary list," Jackson said, trying to sound authoritative, but failing against Kaelin's silent pressure. "Check the VIP investor list." Kaelin said, his voice flat and bored. "Alpha Marcus is expecting us. We are the financing for his new venture." Jackson flipped a page, checked, and swallowed hard. "Apologies, Lord Vane. Go right in." They stepped inside the grand ballroom. It was a sensory overload of music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. The elite of the werewolf world were here, oblivious to the rot beneath the floorboards. Across the room on a raised dais sat Alpha Marcus on a gilded throne he had commissioned for himself. He looked bloated, his face flushed with too much expensive wine. Beside him sat Jessica, dripping in jewelry that Grace recognized as belonging to Kaelin's late mother. Rage flared in Grace's chest, hot and sharp. That necklace she projected to Kaelin. It was your mother's lunar crescent. Kaelin's grip on her arm tightened perceptibly. It will be returned to its rightful owner tonight. They moved through the crowd, like sharks in a reef pool. Kaelin steered her toward the bar, intending to keep a low profile until the speeches began. As they waited for their drinks, a voice cut through the noise near them. "Have you seen the investors from the north?" It was Jessica's voice, shrill and demanding. She was talking to a group of sycophantic young female wolves. "Daddy says they are bringing millions. Finally, I can get that trip to Paris." One of the girls whispered back. "Did you hear about the sacrifice Jess people are saying? The woods have been strangely quiet since that Omega girl was taken." Jessica laughed, a cruel tinkle of sound. "Oh, please. That useless thing, the beast, probably choked on her. Good riddance. She always missed spots when cleaning my boots." Grace froze. The glass in her hand began to show hairline fractures from the pressure of her grip. Steady Kaelin warned her, though. His own inner wolf was snarling fiercely enough to rattle her teeth. "Not yet. Let her dig her own grave." Just then, Jessica turned and saw them. Her eyes widened as she took in Kaelin's magnificent form, and then narrowed with instant venomous jealousy as she looked at Grace's dress. Jessica sauntered over, flanked by her entourage. "Well, hello. I don't recognize you two. Who might you be under those masks?" Kaelin turned, slowly looking down at her, with an imperious disdain that made Jessica falter slightly. "We are the people paying for your champagne, little girl. Run along back to your father." Jessica's face turned beet red. No one spoke to the Alpha's daughter like that. "Excuse me, do you know who I am? I could have you thrown out into the snow." "You could try," Grace said. Her voice was different now, deeper resonant with the Alpha power she shared with Kaelin. It carried a weight that silenced the immediate area. Jessica stared at Grace, confusion warring with anger on her face. There was something horrifyingly familiar in that voice, something that made Jessica's inner wolf whine in submission, much to her disgust. Before Jessica could cause a scene, a trumpet blasted from the stage. The music died down. Alpha Marcus stood up, tapping a microphone. "Welcome, friends, allies, and esteemed guests." Marcus boomed, his fake smile plastered on. "Tonight is a historic night for Silver Creek. Tonight we secure our future." He gestured to a small table to his right, where two men in expensive human business suits sat with briefcases. "Tonight we sign a partnership with Crimson Rock Global that will bring unparalleled prosperity to our land." Kaelin took the glass from Grace's trembling hand and set it on a passing waiter's tray. "It's time," he said. They began to walk toward the stage. The crowd parted for them, an unconscious reaction to the sheer aura of power they were now letting bleed through their scent masks. Marcus picked up a gold pen hovering over the contract that would sell the bones of their ancestors. And so, Marcus announced dramatically, "I sign away the old ways and usher in the new. I object." The voice wasn't loud, but it hit the room like a thunderclap. It was deep, gravelly, and vibrated in the chest of every shifter present. Marcus froze. He looked up into the crowd squinting against the stage lights. "Who said that? Show yourself?" Kalen stepped into the clear lane leading to the stage. He reached up and slowly untied his mask, letting it fall to the floor. A ripple of shock went through the room. Several older wolves gasped. One elder dropped his cane. Marcus went pale. The pen fell from his numb fingers, clattering loudly on the floor. He looked as if he were seeing a ghost. "Impossible!" Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. You're dead. I killed you." Kalen smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Grace had ever seen. "You tried, Marcus, but you forgot one thing about real kings." Kalen stepped onto the stage, his violet eyes glowing with lethal intent. "We don't die easy." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath of a pendulum swinging before the blade drops. Kalen stood center stage, the lights catching the scar that Marcus had given him 10 years ago. He looked every inch the resurrected king. He pointed a finger directly at Marcus, who was shrinking back against his gilded throne. "Marcus Thorn." Kalen's voice boomed, amplified not by microphones but by raw alpha authority. "I accuse you of high treason. I accuse you of attempted regicide. I accuse you of poisoning your true alpha and of selling the sacred lands of this pack for human coin." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the stolen contract, slamming it onto the table in front of the human businessmen who were looking increasingly terrified. "Read it," Kalen commanded the crowd. "He is selling the burial grounds for strip mining. He is selling your history." A murmur of outrage rippled through the Silver Creek members. Even Marcus's loyalists looked horrified at the desecration of the burial grounds. "Lies," Marcus screamed, finding his voice. He stood up, saliva gathering at the corner of his mouth. "He is an imposter, a demon wearing the face of the dead Kalen guards. Kill him. Kill the abomination." Beta Jackson and 10 other enforcers rushed the stage, shifting into their wolves mid-stride. Kalen didn't flinch. He didn't even shift. He simply threw his head back and roared. It was an alpha command of pure, undiluted power. The sonic force of it hit the oncoming wolves like a physical wall. They whimpered, crashing to the floor, forced into submission by a dominance far greater than Marcus had ever possessed. Jackson skidded to a halt at Kalen's feet, whining, unable to meet his eyes. Kalen looked down at Jackson with profound disappointment. "Stand down, pup. You were always a follower." He turned his attention back to Marcus. "Your pack won't fight for you, coward, because they know the truth now. I challenge you, Marcus. Here and now, the right of blood and bone. Winner takes the pack. Loser takes the grave." It was the most ancient challenge. It could not be refused in front of witnesses without automatic forfeiture of the alpha title. Marcus looked around wildly. The visiting alphas were watching him with hard eyes. If he backed down, he was finished anyway. He was cornered. With a snarl of desperation, Marcus ripped off his tuxedo jacket. "You want to die again, Kalen? Fine. I'll finish the job this time." Marcus began to shift. His bones cracked sickeningly as he grew into a large, rusty brown wolf. But he was soft from years of luxury. His fur was patchy, his muscles undefined. Kalen watched him, his expression calm. Then he let go. The transformation was instantaneous. There was no slow cracking of bones. One moment, Kaelin was a man. The next, the massive, scarred black wolf stood on the stage, dwarfing Marcus. The sheer size differential drew gasps of awe from the crowd. Marcus lunged. He was slower than Kaelin remembered. Kaelin sidestepped the attack effortlessly, letting Marcus crash into the podium, sending microphones screeching. Kaelin didn't attack immediately. He toyed with him. He battered Marcus with a massive paw, sending the rusty wolf tumbling across the stage. It was a demonstration of humiliation. Kaelin was showing the pack just how weak their false idol was. Below the stage, Jessica was watching her world crumble. Her father was losing. Her status was vanishing. Her eyes landed on the woman in silver, standing near the stairs, the Lady Grace who had insulted her. Rage blinded Jessica. It was all her fault. She pulled a silver-plated dagger she kept concealed in her garter, a cowardly weapon for a wolf, but Jessica was her father's daughter. She screamed and charged at Grace's back, the dagger raised to strike. "Die, you bitch!" Grace didn't need the mind-link warning. Her enhanced hearing picked up the rush of air and the scent of Jessica's metallic fury. Grace spun around. She caught Jessica's wrist mid-air, her grip like an iron vice. "Hello, Jessica," Grace said, coldly, ripping the mask from her own face. Jessica's eyes almost popped out of her head. "You, the scrub, the sacrifice." "The queen," Grace corrected. Jessica shrieked and tried to shift, but Grace didn't give her the chance. She twisted Jessica's wrist, hearing a satisfying snap as the dagger clattered to the floor. Then Grace shifted. The ballroom erupted in genuine shock this time, a brilliant flash of light, and where the woman in silver stood there was now a wolf of pure, blinding white. Her fur seemed to glow from within. A white wolf, the rarest of all, the symbol of the moon goddess's direct favor. The visiting alphas and elders immediately dropped to one knee in deep respect. To attack a white wolf was blasphemy. Jessica, faced with this divine manifestation, wet herself in terror. She collapsed to the floor, whimpering, baring her throat in utter submission to the wolf she used to kick for fun. Grace, her white wolf towering over Jessica, placed one heavy paw on Jessica's chest, pinning her. She leaned down and growled directly into Jessica's face, a sound that promised retribution for years of torment. Jessica fainted from pure fear. On the stage, the fight was over. Marcus was beaten. He lay on his back, bleeding from dozens of shallow cuts, his chest heaving. Kaelin's giant black wolf stood over him, his jaws clamped around Marcus's throat. He hadn't bitten down yet. He was waiting. The room held its breath. By rights, Kaelin should kill him. Kaelin looked out at the crowd. He saw the faces of the people he had grown up with, the people who had betrayed him through inaction. He saw Grace, his magnificent white queen, holding her own court on the floor below. He released Marcus's throat. He shifted back into his human form, standing naked and glorious on the stage, blood not his own streaking his chest. He looked down at the whimpering brown wolf that was Marcus. "Death is too easy for you, traitor," Kaelin announced, his voice echoing in the rafters. "You wanted to sell our history, then you shall have none." He raised his voice for the formal decree. "I, Kaelin Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Silver Creek, hereby strip Marcus Thorn of his rank, his name, and his wolf. I hereby banish him as Omega. He is rogue. He is prey. Get him out of my sight." Two neighboring alphas, eager to curry favor with the returning king, jumped onto the stage. They grabbed the reverted, naked and weeping Marcus and dragged him out the back doors into the freezing night. Kaelin walked to the edge of the stage. He looked down at Grace. She shifted back, standing proudly in her torn silver dress, her hair wild, her eyes shining. He reached a hand down to her. "Come up here," he commanded softly. Where you belong." Grace took his hand and stepped up onto the dais. They stood together, the Black King and the White Queen, an image of striking, undeniable power. The entire ballroom, from the highest visiting alpha to the lowest Silver Creek servant, dropped to their knees and bowed their heads to the floor. The reign of the usurper was over. The true king had returned, and he had brought a storm with him. The sun rose over Silver Creek the next morning, but for the first time in years the light didn't feel grey and oppressive. It felt golden. The pack house was in a state of controlled chaos. The previous night's gala had turned into a coronation, and the transition of power was swift and brutal. Kalen didn't believe in long, drawn-out bureaucracy. He believed in action. Grace sat in the Alpha's office, their office, watching the snow fall outside the high windows. She was still wearing one of Kalen's oversized flannel shirts, sipping hot coffee from a mug that looked tiny in her hands. The door opened, and Beta Jackson was shoved inside by two of Kalen's new personal guards, recruited from the loyalist families who had secretly kept the old ways alive. Jackson looked terrible. His tuxedo was torn, his eye was swollen shut, and he smelled of fear and stale sweat. He fell to his knees the moment he saw Grace. "Grace, please!" Jackson begged, his voice cracking. "I had no choice. Marcus threatened my family. I never wanted to chain you to that stone. You have to believe me. We were friends once." Grace set her mug down slowly. The ceramic clink sounded like a gavel in the silent room. She looked at Jackson. She remembered the crush she'd had on him in high school. She remembered how he used to smile at her when no one was looking. But she also remembered the coldness in his eyes when he tightened the bolts on her wrists. She remembered him turning his back while the crowd chanted for her death. Kalen leaned against the heavy oak desk, his arms crossed over his chest. He was watching Grace letting her lead. This was her justice to mete her out. "We were never friends, Jackson," Grace said softly. "Friends don't feed friends to monsters." "I was afraid," Jackson cried. "So was I," Grace countered, her voice hardening. "But I didn't sell my soul. You stood by while Marcus sold our history for lithium mines. You stood by while Jessica tormented the weak. You aren't a beta, Jackson. A beta is the backbone of the pack. You are just cartilage. Soft. Weak." Kalen grunted his agreement. "Shall I banish him, my queen?" Grace looked at Jackson, trembling on the rug. Banishment meant certain death in winter. It was what Marcus deserved. But Jackson was just a coward. "No," Grace decided. "Banishment is too easy. If he leaves, he doesn't have to look at what he broke." She stood up and walked around the desk, stopping just inches from him. "You will stay, Jackson, but not as beta. That title is stripped from you." Jackson looked up, hope warring with confusion. "Then, what?" "You will take my old position," Grace said, a small cold smile playing on her lips. "The third-floor lavatories need scrubbing. The grouting is terrible. And after that, you can help the Omegas in the laundry. You will serve this pack from the bottom up until you learn what it actually means to be part of a community." Kalen let out a low, approving laugh. "Poetic. And Jessica, she can help him," Grace said dismissively. "She always said I missed spots. Now she can show me how it's done." Jackson slumped, realizing the humiliation that awaited him was perhaps worse than exile. "Yes, Alpha. Yes, Luna. Get him out," Kalen commanded the guards. As the door closed, silence returned to the room. Kalen pushed off the desk and pulled Grace into his arms. The heat of him was grounding, a constant reminder that the nightmare was over. "You are merciful," Kalen murmured into her hair. "More than I would have been." "We can't rule with fear," said Kalen. She whispered, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. Marcus ruled with fear. We have to rule with strength. There's a difference. Kaelin pulled back to look at her. His violet eyes, usually so fierce, were soft with adoration. You were the one the prophecy meant, not the sacrifice, but the savior. The white wolf who cleanses the rot. He walked her over to the window. Down below in the courtyard, the pack was gathering. They weren't being forced. They were coming of their own volition. They were bringing food from their own pantries to share, starting the process of rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. The curse is broken, Grace observed. The snow looks cleaner. The land reflects the king, Kaelin said, and the queen. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. There is much work to do, Grace. We have to tear up the mining contracts. We have to renegotiate the treaties with the southern packs. We have to rebuild the council. We will, Grace promised, but not right now. No, Kaelin raised an eyebrow. What do you propose we do right now? Grace grinned, her eyes flashing with a hint of her wolf's playfulness. I spent 3 weeks in a cabin learning how to hunt. I think it's time the pack saw their alphas run. Kaelin's smile matched hers. A run sounds perfect. They didn't bother with the stairs. They opened the balcony doors to the biting winter wind. Grace shifted mid-leap, her form dissolving into the brilliant, blinding white wolf. She hit the snow below with a grace that defied gravity. A split second later, a massive black shadow joined her. The Alpha King, scarred and terrifying to his enemies, but a guardian to his mate. A howl ripped through the valley. It wasn't a howl of pain or hunger. It was a dual harmony, the deep bass of the black wolf and the soaring soprano of the white wolf. It was a song of victory, a song of return. The pack members in the courtyard stopped their work and looked up. They saw the 2 wolves racing toward the tree line, a blur of yin and yang against the landscape. For the first time in 10 years, the Silver Creek pack didn't feel afraid of the woods. They watched their king and queen disappear into the trees, knowing that as long as those 2 wolves roamed the forest, they were safe. The sacrifice had been made. The old Silver Creek was dead. Long live the pack. And that, my friends, is the story of how a betrayed king and an underestimated sacrifice took back their kingdom. I honestly think Grace's punishment for Jackson and Jessica was perfect. Sometimes living with your failure is way harder than just being banished. What do you think? Was Grace too soft on them? Let me know in the comments below. Would you have banished them or made them scrub the floors? I really want to read your theories. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and instant karma, please smash that. Like button, it really helps the channel grow, so I can bring you more long stories like this one. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.